Um, so where do we begin with this international working business? One of the most important things that I've realized over the years is that deciding to work internationally is also very much a part of your organizational and artistic development. So it doesn't sit in a little basket all on its own on the top shelf. It's something that is integral to everything you do, or integral to everything you plan to do. So international becomes very much a part of who you are and what you do and the sort of work that you make.
Would you say that, Gary, that it's kind of one way of achieving your kind of individual or company ambitions? It's a kind of another tool for furthering your mission, rather than this sort of bolted on.
Yes, it's not bolted on. It's very, very much part of what you do and who you are and what your ambition is, really. One of the things that we'll be looking at this morning is looking at yourselves and auditing yourselves, if you like, to have a good idea of whether you're ready to take on this international stuff, because it's a lot of work. It's in addition to what you do, not instead of. And so one of the first things you have to consider is, am I ready? But there's one thing even before that, and that is to answer the question, why? Why do I want to do it? Now, of course, there's not one answer to that. It can be a whole series of answers or discussions that you have with your colleagues and your collaborators. But I think a good understanding of why you want to do it is a really good starting place.
Could you give some examples of why people might want to work internationally, Gary?
More increasingly, certainly in independent sector, I'm finding that there's a lot of appetite for international collaboration. By that, I mean residences and co-productions and working with somebody else overseas, rather than this idea of, oh, I've got a show, let me package it up and sell it. I mean, there is still a place for that, but I'm finding with the smaller companies and with the independent companies, I would say international collaboration is the big thing. And it's to sort of get you out of your comfort zone a bit, really, to widen your vision of what it is you want to achieve artistically.
Yeah, so more of a kind of artistic gain than, say, something.
Yeah. I mean, we can speak for ages about international work and international development, but do remember it's essentially about the work and the work that you're making and whether that work would benefit from having that international aspect in it.
In your opinion, is it a good way to make money?
It used to be. Yes, you can make money. You won't make lots of money. But I would say that if you can't at least cover your costs or make a little bit to go back into the pot, then it's not worth doing. Because nobody funds you to go overseas, nobody funds you to work internationally, and it has to pay for itself. I do know of companies in the past that have gone broke because they didn't budget it right, and they were dependent entirely on audience numbers and ticket sales. And it's a commercial thing. It becomes a commercial thing if that's your take on it. And to be honest, it's a bit risky nowadays. So I wouldn't say there's loads of money to be made, but there can be a decent little bit of profit if your budget's looking good and your arrangements with your overseas partners are good.
Great. I mean, we're going to do one whole webinar on budgeting and finance.
That's what I think. It's really important.
Yeah.
Just before you say anything else, if you're all scribbling notes there, just doubly underline that once you start working internationally, it's a commercial proposition. It's very, very unlikely that you'll be subsidised financially.
So we don't really have a lot of subsidy for international working in the UK.
No, not financial. There's pots of support and development pots and things, but they're all very piecemeal, and you can't sort of say to the British Council, I've got this great show on a tour, it would give me £20,000. Doesn't work like that.
Great. So another key question that we often get asked is whether an artist or company's work is suitable for international touring. I wondered if you had any thoughts on that. I know you do.
It's a difficult one to pin down, isn't it? This is one of those really broad questions that I always find difficult to home in on. I think one of the first things you have to check is it different? Has it got its own unique selling point? Don't think you're doing a really great Ibsen and then take it up to Scandinavian countries, because they do it very well themselves. Does your piece of work concentrate itself around a Leeds housing estate and all the social issues around that housing estate? Would that work overseas? Depends. I think you've got to look at the universality of your work and what you're saying about the world, or indeed about a small part of society in the UK that could say something about the world. And I think you have to look for something that travels, basically. If it's UK specific, really UK specific, and especially if it's in UK accent, you may have trouble finding takers. People ask me a lot about language. Of course, lighter language and yes, lightness of language is a plus. But always remember that Shakespeare is still the biggest seller in the world internationally. So it's not necessarily a problem. And more venues now, as technology has improved, are surtitling anyway. So I wouldn't worry too much about too much language. It's the type of language you're using I would consider.
So just for the people watching, we did talk a bit about this in the last training sessions. Was a lot about kind of sort of what makes a great piece of international touring work, and we did record those sessions, and they're online on the Professional Development pages of our website if you would like to go for those. I wonder then if, Gary, if it's an opportunity to just have a look at the triangle planning exercise, which is a
yes.
reality check exercise.
iPad, yes. So for those of you who've had a look at it, I'll just, or maybe you haven't got it in front of you, I'll just briefly describe it. It's a very simple diagram of an equilateral triangle. Oh, Hannah, marvellous. This is technology at its finest. And at each corner of the equilateral triangle are three different concepts. At the apex is a cloud which is holding your mission statement, your vision and your ambition. That's sort of something you're probably already worked out and feel comfortable with. If you haven't, then you should do, and you should feel really comfortable with it before you even start thinking about international. So that cloud holds up the triangle, which is nicely equilateral. At the other corners is money, and on the other corner is people. And it's not the number of people you have, it's the type of people you have. So this triangle could be quite small because you're a small company, but it means you're restricted to within the triangle for what your output can be. And that triangle is given its size by how much money you've got, whether or not you've got the right people, and whether or not your mission statement and ambition are in keeping with those other two things, if that makes sense. Now, if you want to work internationally, what you're going to need to do is to grow your triangle a little.
So would we call the inside of the triangle your capacity?
Yes, it's your capacity and it's the work that you're able to achieve. Yes, Anna, it is your capacity. It's what you're able to achieve. So, you know, if you've got a small, fairly equilateral triangle, that's fine. You can do 1 or 2 shows a year, or maybe 1 or 2 shows every 2 or 3 years. It doesn't matter. But if you want to sort of add in the international aspect, that triangle is going to need to grow a little bit. Now, what you do need to do in that case to grow the triangle is to double check back on your mission and your vision and your ambition and have that discussion. Does our current mission statement and our vision for our organisation embrace internationalism? That's the easy bit. Then
so, for example, if your mission is predominantly to work with the people of Hull, then you would need to expand that.
You need to broaden it a little, yes, well, a lot, yes. Once that's secure, you can then look at the money and the people side. And if you're going to grow the triangle successfully to be able to achieve more in terms of capacity, you're going to need to look at how you can improve the money angle and the people angle. Because if you don't keep them in balance, the triangle becomes squeezed. All right? Now, how clear is that? How clear is that to you, Hannah?
I think that's very clear. I think the thing that I'm sure we will get some questions afterwards, but the thing that I think immediately springs to mind is the money part. And I know we're not going to give kind of specific advice on sort of how people might expand their triangle, because it's so specific to these artists and companies. But I think one of the things is to not always think about things directly. So it might not be that you directly need to fund your international work, but that perhaps you can bring in income from other areas of what you do that then free up money to work in one side of things. And the same with the people element.
Exactly. And with the money, it's not always about just getting more money. It's about revisiting your budgets and reapportioning it. Because if you want to start the international stuff, you are going to need a bit of budget for it, to travel around a bit more and to go to meetings overseas and to have these occasional hotel nights and things. So it's about looking at what your budget is looking like. Anyway, your task on this particular exercise, because we can't do it now, is to sit back at the office and with your colleagues or with your friends or your collaborators and look at that triangle. Decide what your triangle is like now. Is it equilateral? What do you need to do to balance it up? And then if you need to grow the triangle, what do you need to take into account with those 3 angles? Mission, money, people. Now, all those instructions are on the bottom of the sheet, so hopefully you'll be able to work out what to do. It's a really good way of getting an instant image of where you are and where you'd like to be heading.
Would you say this becomes the kind of basis of your strategy, your international strategy or planning?
It could be a very, very beginning, yes. In tandem with the next ones we'll look at when we get to them. But what I want it to be more than anything, don't get terribly depressed if your triangle's squeezed up, because I tell you now, most people's are. Use it as a starting point for conversation on what do we need to look at, and is this good for us now? And you may decide, looking at that, now leave it another year or 2.
Definitely, and approaching international in this way, I think really helps people to take a more strategic approach, rather than running in headfirst, taking something that you can't manage and then ending up either completely over capacity or indeed, as you say, broke.
Exactly.
Okay, brilliant. We mentioned the other exercises. Should we move on to the evaluation wheel?
Yeah, well, this is all about now helping you to assess if you're ready to take on international. That's the second one, Hannah. There's another one there with
Sorry.
Yes. this first assessment wheel. And basically, again, I'll describe it briefly for those of you who haven't seen it. It's a wheel split into segments, and each segment has a heading. So we have relationships with funders and partners, networks and contacts, capacity, risk-taking, long-term planning, previous experience, financial stability, and artistic style. And within the circle are a series of inner lines from 1 to 10. And the idea for this, and again, it's a conversation starter, is to look at this first assessment wheel in terms of where you are now and what you're doing. This is nothing to do with the future. This is entirely an audit of where you are now. And the idea is that you have a look at each segment and award yourself a score of 1 to 10 within the segment. So for example, if you're really, really happy with your relationships with funders and partners, you could score yourself a 10, and you just draw a little line around that segment, that part of the circle on the number 10 line. But if you're a bit unhappy about your networks and contacts, you may only mark that a 3. So you go around the circle, and overall you look at what this bicycle wheel with its spokes look like. And of course there could be high ones, there could be low ones. The idea for you is to discuss what areas are you weak at? What are you not doing so great at? What can you improve? Because to be ready for international, or to start working internationally, you need to have the right capacity to take it on. And again, with this wheel, it doesn't have to be all 10s. What's best for it to be is as even as possible. You don't want any great big bumps going on. So perhaps something you're really happy with, you don't need to spend much more time on. What you do need to do is bring up the ones you're not so confident about.
Yeah.
And what you're looking at is, if you like, if you think of it in terms of bike wheel, you're looking at a less bumpy ride. And this is something else that you can take away and do with the team. Don't do it on your own, and discuss it and look at where you are now. And again, you'll get an absolute clear snapshot of where you are now.
And this is kind of narrowing in to become a little bit more specific around the kind of exact types of things you might need to work on.
This is being really honest with yourselves about where you are now, so you can decide, can we start taking on international work? Because let me just say now, I always say this at some point, taking on international work is a slow burn. It's not something that happens overnight. It can take you 2 to 3 years to get yourself in a position where you think, right, now we can go.
Definitely. I think there's a kind of common myth around international that, you know, that you take a show to Edinburgh, for example, it will be picked up and then it will tour massively internationally. And while that does happen, it's quite rare.
Yes, it can happen. I've known it happen. It is rare. It's not the usual way of things happening. I mean, you may be one of the lucky ones where somebody sees your work and they say, yes, I want it, and you're suddenly off. But you still have to be ready underneath all that. Beneath the glitz and glam of the offer is all this hard work hiding underneath that you need to be ready for.
That's so important, I think, to remember. There's even once you've got the offer, have you got the capacity to deliver?
Yeah.
And to capitalise on that opportunity as well.
I just do need to say here that I may be painting a sort of a grimmish picture. It's not at all. For the most part, every company and every artist I know who works internationally loves it and has a whale of a time. I'm just trying to be realistic at this very early stage, that you need to be aware of whether you can take it or not. I think the end goals are well worth aiming for.
Yeah. I think it's important. I think what you've said is really important, though, is to think about why you want to work internationally. Yeah. Perhaps, you know, what you want to achieve as a company, international isn't right. for you. That's okay. That's okay. I think again, there's a kind of common myth that, you know, in order to progress, international is like the next stage
Sure.
on. You know, that's some signifier of success if you can take your work internationally. But actually, it's about whether that's the right choice for you as a company.
Yes.
And also, you know, international is a absolutely huge area. You know, yeah, one of the things that people need to think about is kind of which countries and which contexts are right for their work as well. How can people kind of get to know different contexts? What do you recommend to artists like you?
In terms of getting into the headspace, if you like.
Yeah, and like where might be the right fit for their work?
Well, again, that takes time to find out. What I recommend you do in the first instance is get yourself into the right spaces. And that means sign up to things like newsletters from Farnham Maltings, sign up to British Council newsletters, start following international companies on Facebook and Twitter and things, and start getting into that mindset with them. Go over, we'll talk through the links page later, but tomorrow in Croatia is the start of an IETM conference, which is probably the biggest, most important networking organisation in Europe. And I would recommend you start just having a look at their website to see what's going on and what the opportunities are there as a member of IETM. And sort of just start getting into the groove of it, if you like. And then you can start seeing what's around and what's happening already. I always use this thing, not just for international, but for organisational development, is this concept of appreciative inquiry, which is based around 4 Ds, which is dream, discover, design, deliver, in that order. Dream, first of all, is all this sort of stuff that I've given you, the wheel and the triangle, and wouldn't it be great if, and wouldn't it be great if we could do this, or if we started making work with a company in Croatia, wouldn't this be great? This is the dream. The discover is the bit we're talking about now, which is research, finding out what's going on, finding out what opportunities exist. And only when you know those two can you start making it into an actionable thing. And then you start designing it. And you design and you plan your international development alongside your UK business plan. And then deliver speaks for itself. That's when you've actually taken the leap and you're doing something.
Definitely, that's great.
That's
really, I think that's really useful. We're going to do a whole session on networks in January.
Okay. So I just say the 4 Ds again quickly, so everybody's got them. So it's dream, discover, design, deliver.
I think that's great. The other thing that I sometimes recommend to artists is to look at other artists who are already working internationally, who might be in a similar style to you, or like or companies that you admire, and see where they've toured to.
Sure. You know, everybody's already got their own networks, perhaps not realising it. There are a load of people already out there doing international work, and I can say with confidence that they're really generous of their time, and they're really happy to share information and to help. And so just draw in all those people around you that you already know.
It's one of the things that we put in our top tips that we can come on to shortly, is that it's not a competitive arena, you know.
No.
And actually, you shouldn't hold your contacts close either. You know, a promoter is probably more likely to trust you if you recommend somebody else than if you just hard sell you.
Yeah, you're in competition with no one. That's a really important point.
So,
Shall I look at this next international wheel now?
yes, yeah.
So the next wheel I have is I've called the international wheel, and it's a blank wheel. And it's for you to look at once you've done that first wheel with the headings, to look at where you are now. The blank wheel is for you to fill in the sections yourself about where you're heading internationally. So it's a sort of a dream wheel, if you like. It could turn into a discover wheel, but it could be the start of your international thinking and planning. So for example, if one of your dreams is, I want to work in Australia, make that one of the segments and then give yourself a point on that about how confident you feel about that happening. You can transfer some of the previous segments to it, capacity, for example, but this time on the blank wheel, think about capacity in an international context. What does my capacity need to be? So the second blank wheel is very much a forward thinking one, but you can only do that after you've done the first one. And again, I've put instructions on the bottom.
Great. So then using the information that you get from this, you could take that forward into more of a kind of action plan.
Yeah, exactly. You can then start, from that, you can start doing the discover bit, what's possible, what are other people already doing, and then you can start using it as the basis for your design.
Great.
Because I think throughout, you have to remember that you need to have everybody in an organisation informed and on board. Whether you're a tiny organisation or whether you're mid-scale, maybe you've got a board, maybe you haven't. But if you've got a board or an advisory panel or something, keep them involved as well. You could even get them to do this wheel with you as an exercise.
Definitely, and it's important to have everybody on board because it needs to be so ingrained into what you're doing. It can't just be one person's job.
Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. I wonder then if we should talk a little bit. I know I want to leave plenty of time for questions, but I think it would be good to maybe think about some of the kind of common pitfalls for touring internationally. So we've created a kind of top tips list, which was in with those worksheets, and is also available on our website. And I wonder if there are some kind of common pitfalls that people fall into when beginning to work internationally.
I think rushing it is one of the biggest problems, is thinking that it can happen. Oh, I've got this great show and it's doing really well on my UK tour. Let's take it overseas. And actually, it's really difficult to do because you need to have made those relationships with people long before. Don't do it yourself. You cannot do it yourself. Booking, what I hear a lot of is, oh yeah, I could really do some tips on how to book an international tour. Well, no, my top tip for that is don't. It's almost impossible to book an international tour.
By that you mean sort of date to date to date to date?
Yeah, I mean, you know how hard enough it is in the UK. And I mean, you know how hard Janice works at the Farnham Maltings just to do a village hall booking tour. It takes forever with the logistics. Can you imagine that on a larger scale, where you've got to get your people and your set from Belgium through to West Germany, ready for a performance the next night? It just doesn't work like that. So don't book your own tour. You always work with a local promoter. But the slow burn is finding out who those local promoters are and why would they be interested in your work.
You mean like an agent?
No, a promoter is somebody who will actually pay you for the work.
Okay.
And normally take the local on ticket sales.
So venue or festival.
Yes, that's looking at the model we call the performance fee model, where you would agree a fee for performing your work, and that is guaranteed. And then the promoter puts you into the local venue, arranges your transport and all of that. So your promoter is your best friend.
And I've certainly worked in situations before where people can broker, those promoters have their own networks within a country or within a region, and they can help put you in touch with other people. So then it is possible to potentially have, maybe go somewhere and then have one or two more gigs after that.
Yeah, if we think of the Edinburgh Showcase and indeed Caravan Showcase, we always talk about delegates. Well, those delegates are actually the promoters. They're coming to see the work with a view to taking it on.
Yeah.
So they're your promoters. Now, agents are dodgy characters because they take percentages and things. There's not really an international agents network that I know of.
No, it's quite common in some areas like America and China.
Yes, that's different. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So what anything else that you think of, a kind of top in a sort of, I mean, people can read the top tips, but any others that you'd like to kind of draw out of there that feel kind of particularly?
Yeah, well, we've already sort of touched on it really, is I would say just be really secure with what you're doing in the UK. Feel secure artistically, feel secure financially. And only then can you have that confidence to take this extra leap. So feel good about what you're doing in the UK. You may only do tiny tours around small venues. That doesn't matter. It's whether you feel that it's working, the work's good, you know, you're running a company that is viable. I think that's important. You know, you're not working from month to month on a few shillings loose change, but you know, you have got a little tiny bit of reserve just to cover you for any surprises. And I think if you feel in a good, confident place, then you're in a great place to go internationally. And if you don't, then just put it on the back burner for a bit until you do feel good. And these exercises that we've given you may help you to work out whether you do feel good about where you are now or not.
Definitely. The one that I wanted to pull out was around kind of digital presence. So obviously lots of companies have really strong digital presences, but some don't. And one of the things I know that you always say is that the first interaction that a promoter might have with you, or probably has with you, is your website.
Yes, that's true.
So if you don't say that you're an international company on your website, then they won't know.
Yes,
that is necessarily true.
That's right. On the About Us page, it has to show somewhere that you have international ambition, or that you call yourself a national and an international company. And these things are very cheap to change and to keep up to date. But also with the digital stuff, one of the most difficult things always is getting people to see your work. But more and more people now, because of the quality of video and online streaming, more and more promoters are happy to look at them online. So I would also make good quality videos of your work to show to people overseas. It doesn't have to be the whole show. Very few people have time to sit and watch a whole show when they've got a stack of 50 to see. Yeah. So I would say film the whole show and then do like a show reel version.
But it's much more of a kind of documentation element rather than a trailer, for example.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. Because what they want to see more than anything is the style of your work, and to see whether or not it's high enough quality, frankly. But it's almost impossible to get people to come to the UK to see your work, especially if they don't know you.
Yeah. I mean, also people are thinking much more about how often they travel and the reasons for their travel, because of the climate emergency as well. So having video of your work really does help get your work out there without needing.
So that needs budgeting for. Again, that's going back to the corner of the triangle with a pile of money in it. But a lot of this stuff you would do for the UK anyway.
Yeah.
So it's not always an addition. If you film your stuff for the UK, then that's fine.
Use it.
Be any different.
So I'm going to just say to people, if you would like to start asking some questions, then please do. While you think of some, we're going to just have a quick chat about Brexit. I'm sure everyone is bored to tears with talking about Brexit, but maybe we could just address that as it's the kind of elephant in the room with regards to touring in the EU specifically. I know that the government have published some guidance online about how leaving without a deal will affect arts industry and touring specifically, and the link to that is on the useful further reading document that Gary's put together for us. I think that probably the key thing to say is that we don't know that much yet.
No, I mean, we know what we know, and all we can rely on is this stuff that the government has set out. It's in your forward links reading. It's quite depressing, because in the good old days, I would always say cut your teeth in the European Union, because there were no customs barriers, the social security and tax was all sorted. This government advice for a no-deal Brexit just turns all of that on its head. And basically working in France or Germany will be the same as working in America. There's also an Arts Council guide there, which is a little softer and quite practical. If there is no deal, then really everything's going to change, and you're going to have to treat all the EU countries much the same as you would anywhere else in the world. But this is where your promoter, again, will really become your friend, the person you're working with, because they will know about local tax rules, they will know about customs issues and all of that stuff. Top tip here, don't do it alone. You always work with somebody in the country. If there is a deal and there's a transition period, nothing will change for the next couple of years. And at the end of the transition period, depending on the agreements they come to, perhaps there won't be much change forever, but we just don't know.
Yeah, definitely. And it really depends on kind of what happens, how we're classified as a country in the EU.
Yes, whether we're a third country. Well, we will be a third country, but the UK may sign up to a customs agreement. They may sign up to alignment with the single market, which will mean similar tax rules, but we just don't know.
And I mean, lots of countries do have exemptions for arts touring in the same way that we do receiving international work into this country, but it will depend whether they are
specific rather than a trading block specific all of a sudden. So that will need a lot more of the sort of research aspects of what you're going to do. But it will make it more difficult, and it will probably make it a bit more costly, but don't let it stop you, because the message I get from our European friends and colleagues is that they still want to work with UK based companies. That hasn't changed.
Yeah.
Let's not forget what we're good at. We've still got quite a good reputation artistically and culturally, and a lot of companies and a lot of artists and organisations still want to work with the UK, so bear that in mind as well.
Brilliant. So we've got some questions, so I'm going to just read those out and then we can do our best to answer them. So the first one is, what are the best international networking and showcasing events other than IETM?
Well, there's a couple on the links page. There's the New York one and there's the Australian one, APAP and APAM. They're both membership organisations, and they both have these huge annual conferences. I think the New York one is January, and I can't remember the Australian one. Can you, Hannah? I can't remember. But anyway, it's on their website, and both of those are worth looking at. And in the past, from from Arts Council and British Council, there have been little pots of money to encourage independent arts organisations and artists to attend these. So it's always worth sniffing around to see if there's any pots of money available to help you get to them. They're huge, but everybody I know says they're huge and they're scary. It's like going to Olympia for a big trade fair, but they really like it and they get a lot out of it.
So the other one that I am aware of is ISPA, which is the International.
I don't know so much about it.
So they have two meetings every year, one in New York in January, which is, as you say, kind of like big trade fair moment, usually a little bit daunting. And then they also have another meeting somewhere else in June, which is a little bit more sedate.
Is this on our links?
If it is, I can add it in.
No, it's there. It's there. APAP, ISPA and APAM, voila. There's one other little association I always find useful. You can't be a member of it if you're not a festival, but it's a great little research website, and it's the European Festivals Association. And every member lists their festival, what time of year it is, who the audience are, what the central core of the festival is, and it's a really useful thing. And I'm not sure if that's on there. No, it's the European Festivals Association, and it's efa.org, I believe.
I can add that one in.
Yes, please. And that's really good for research. As I say, if you're not a festival, you can't be a member of it.
So there's one other networking event if you're working in children's work. Assertage is the biggest one for children's work, and I can add that on to the links document as well.
Specifically for people and children, isn't it? Yeah.
And the other question was about showcasing events. So, I mean, there are showcasing events in this country, so there will be a new one, Arts Council funded one in 2021 in Edinburgh. There has for a long time been the British Council Showcase one. Caravan is one also. Internationally, so we've got international showcasing platforms. The one that I know mostly about is CNARS, which is a kind of like specific showcasing event in Quebec, biennial event in Quebec. Yeah. But you do have to fund yourself to get there.
Yeah.
But international festivals are good platforms because they do attract international delegates looking for work.
Yes, they do. And there are a lot of those, and that's worth looking at the Festivals Association website for, but also IETM website, which also has a lot of these up. One that comes to mind is the International Festival of Tbilisi in Georgia, which attracts hundreds of people to it, but that is a typical showcase festival. You don't get a fee for going there. And they open invitations to go and invite you to come, but you have to pay your own way. So, you know, that's worth considering and looking at whether your budgets can take that. But there are a load of these showcasing festivals. There's High Fest in Armenia with our tour. They're all great little showcasing festivals, but a lot of them can't help you with the financing of getting there.
Okay, so I'm going to move on to the next question, which is, I'm going to just read it out. So when I first started creating work, I felt quite lucky and took some shows to a few international festivals, though none were paid. And with this hindsight, I shouldn't have done them. How do you discover different international festivals and different promoters? And when you're starting from scratch, it's difficult to feel like you're not searching for a needle in a haystack, which is a very fair point.
I know. First of all, can I say, if you pay for yourself to go, that is often the way. My recommendation, though, is when you do your budgeting, you need to look at whether you can stand that in the long term, whether you can absorb it. And that's why I'm talking about thinking a couple of years ahead. So in your overall business plan, you can say, okay, can I pile in £2,000 money next September to do this? And the decision then is much more rational. So don't beat yourself up. It's not always wrong, but it's just whether or not you can absorb it. Some of these festivals are pay your own. That's the way they work.
And I mean, international can feel really exciting. It can feel like it's a, you know, that it's a really exciting opportunity. So it's always thinking, you know, looking at using some of the kind of techniques and exercises that we've looked at today is not just thinking about whether you can do something, but whether you should do it as well, about whether it fits with your ambitions, whether you can afford it in terms of like capacity and money.
But, you know, if you start by looking at something like the Association of European Festivals and do some research on there, find a couple of festivals that you think, oh, these sound good, could suit my sort of work, budget in to attend one of those festivals. And, you know, sometimes it's like the Groningen one in Northern Holland. It's an EasyJet flight and it could be an overnight in a hotel. It doesn't need to be a huge amount of money, but you need to build in this budget for you to get out and about a bit. And I know I keep on about IETM. I'm really not a shareholder and I'm not on the board or anything, but for me, it's the most sane way of getting your foot into that international door and meeting the sort of people that could be beneficial. I mean, they do this great thing called news round, for example, at each big plenary meeting, when you get the chance to stand up for 3 minutes, describe the project you're working on and the sort of collaborators you're looking for. And, you know, you don't get that chance anywhere else.
Yeah.
And I know people who've really found their dream sort of partners out of the news round.
So hopefully that has answered that question. I mean, when you're looking at kind of like discovering international festivals, I think we sort of mentioned it before, was about looking at where other people have toured to and then using that as a basis for some research. Also that one of the international things that Arts Council will support is developing your international networks as well. So in terms, if you're thinking about your international strategy, and networking is one of the things that you want to develop, then perhaps applying for a bit of money for that, or building that into a kind of another application as well.
They have little pots of money for networks and sometimes for organisational development, of course, but they won't ever fund you to take your work.
Yeah. And also the British Council offer bursaries for kind of specific groups to attend IETM. That's kind of ongoing.
Do sign up for the British Council Arts newsletter. It's really worth seeing because they announce all their little pots through that.
Definitely, and they have a really good artist opportunity page where they bring in kind of opportunities, international opportunities and funding from all their British Council local offices and also kind of like wider as well.
Can I just chip in with something here that I forgot to say earlier, but now seems a good time to say it. We're saying, you know, go and do this research and look at this website and get the British Council newsletter and follow the Arts Council, da 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 da. If you can afford to, time-wise, it's not going to cost you much, time-wise, if you could put aside a little dedicated half an hour to an hour each week to specifically do your international stuff, you'll really find it much easier. A lot of people I work with tend to do it last thing on a Friday. They make sure they've wrapped everything up by 4 o'clock. And then they'll do an hour just browsing on the internet and reading what people are saying in Twitter and reading the Arts Council newsletter that's come in that, you know, you've saved but not read. And I think it's about being kind to yourself. Just give yourself that little bit of time that is just about international thinking, and make it work for you at a time that works for you.
I mean, I think that chimes with what you've been saying all the way through this session, which is that, you know, embrace the slow burn, like approach it, strategically and logically, rather than kind of rushing in head first and ending up in a bit of a pickle.
I've run artistic companies and been on boards. I know what the reality is, believe me. And I know that, every day can be really busy with so much to do, and the email backlog and all of that. But just let it all go for half an hour a week and just put your international hat on.
Brilliant. Well, I'm just we're coming sort of towards the end of the session. If anybody's got any more questions, now would be the moment to have to answer them. Just in the last few minutes, I just wanted to have a chat about very briefly ideas of kind of other ways of working internationally. So we've talked predominantly about taking a piece of performance work internationally and taking an existing show to another country, and actually that is only one way that you can work internationally. And I just wondered if in these last few minutes you could give a few examples of other ways that you know of that artists have worked internationally.
Well, yeah, I've mentioned residences. I mean, a lot of independent artists like this model, where they'll go on a residency somewhere, mostly in Europe, where they get space and time to work on ideas or R&D for a show, but they can be working with a colleague in that country. I'm thinking of somewhere like Bios in Athens. There's a place, I can't remember offhand, in Italy, but they do advertise these residencies, and sometimes they're easily found on themove.org, which is on your links list. On the Move sometimes puts up residency opportunities. British Council advertise residency opportunities. That gives you a chance to go overseas to develop your work and your thinking in an international context. A lot of these residencies are free. You just have to find your airfare, because they're financed by local authorities. The other way of working internationally, of course, is in collaboration with other artists, where you work on putting a piece of work together outside of a residency, but your company or if you're an individual artist and they will work together on making a piece of work. And then you have collective effort in getting that piece together, up and out on the road, and you've already got two good starting points, because you've got the UK and you've got whichever country you were working in.
One of the things, sorry, I was just going to say, one of the things that I'm thinking of that, lots of artists are working in really innovative ways, and and the style of work that they create is very unique. And thinking about how you can share that with other practitioners. So another opportunity is kind of offering things like artist development or masterclasses and workshops abroad.
Don't always think about exporting work, think about exporting skills as well, because we are a highly skilled workforce in the UK. And that could be technical, it could be creative, it could be anything. It could be, off the top of my head, how to create work for babies under 6 months old, and we have those skills that other people abroad really want to tap into. But that means that you've got to put together a package for yourself of what you can offer. So it's finding collaboration overseas, but you're taking your skills and helping them develop. There's been a lot of this work going on in Belarus in the last few years, where UK artists have been over there helping them find ways through technical issues and things about making their work sit better in theatre spaces and things.
And the other thing I was just thinking about was about local productions. So if you have a model that you work in, for example, working with participants, then taking that model into other contexts.
Absolutely, yes.
Directing or kind of devising with local performers as well to create a kind of local production. That's something that also is a kind of another sort of business opportunity, is being able to kind of create a local production that can tour without you.
Yeah.
but still kind of bring in.
And I'm thinking of a company like Third Angel, who makes these really interesting sort of durational pieces about migration and things, and they can export the concept of it to be performed by local actors. It's almost like franchising your work.
Well, actually, Rimini Protocol is a German company that they create models of working that they then do franchise out. So they you can realise that in your own. You kind of pay them a royalty for using their idea. Anyway, I'm going to finish there because we've come up to 2 o'clock. We don't seem to have any other questions. But the next webinar that we're going to do at the end of November is around creating your international strategy, and we're going to talk to Louise Blackwell and Selena Thompson around kind of the different ways that they work internationally and the different approaches to creating an international strategy that they have.
You can really start getting under the skin of it all then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just want to say thank you so much, Gary, for being part of this our inaugural webinar, and for sharing all of your amazing knowledge. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks, Hannah, and thanks everyone. All right.
Brilliant. All right. Thank you everybody for joining us, and hopefully we'll see you in the end of November for the next one.
Bye.
Bye.